Okay, we're in Proverbs chapter 26 for the rest of you, if there's anybody left. We're going to have a good time. So, Brittany, which one of the kids I heard you singing back behind me. It was good to hear you sing. No, I love that. Absolutely. So which one of the girls is going to be a singer? Any of them? All of them sing? Oh. Right. Well, we didn't like hearing George sing. It was never a pretty thing, so we didn't know where that would go. Roz tried out for the worship team years ago when we had a different worship leader, and she was told that she didn't have any voice at all. Well, she brought it up. She told us, so it's fair game. We're glad to have you guys here tonight. So, Ellie, how are you doing? We're going out to lunch on Tuesday. Your favorite place? That's right. Dinner, actually. Okay, whatever. Well, I don't care. Whatever it is. All right, we're in chapter 26, Proverbs, verse 13. It gets into a couple of the Proverbs, as we explained to you before, don't really normally all flow together. They're pretty choppy. But we have a section here, and we have a couple of sections when we come to this part tonight. The first one is about the lazy man, and starts in verse 13 where we left off. And so if you're lazy, you want to maybe crawl out of here without anybody seeing you, or your wife may nudge you or something like that. Who knows? But Solomon observed these things. He says, the lazy person claims there's a lion on the road. Yes, I'm sure there's a lion out there. I like the way it's worded in NLT. Yeah, I'm sure. You know, I've heard guys use those kind of lame excuses before too. But the lazy guy is a guy who's just full of excuses because doesn't want to engage in what he knows he needs to be doing. He's always finding, he's always finding a room for not doing something. He's just lazy. Now, everybody has a lazy bone somewhere in their body, right? It's there. And there are moments when you don't want to do anything. I understand that. But we're talking about he's a lifer. This guy's a lifer. And he just doesn't want to do it. Verse 14, he goes a little farther where he says, as the door swings back and forth on its hinges, so the lazy person turns over in bed. In other words, he cannot get himself out of bed. He is so lazy. I love the next one. It's even better yet. Lazy people take food in their hand, but don't even lift it to their mouth. That's about as lazy as. But the whole idea is it's just the lazy person is ridiculous. The sun comes up and the sun goes down, and you got that amount of time to live that day for whatever you want to do. Some people say, well, I've always wanted to go do this, and yet they sleep their life away. I want to build this out in the backyard, but they live there for years and they don't do any of that. Come on, you got to get up off the couch, and that's what he's saying. Now, I'm not saying that applies to any of you here. I see the looks. Some of the wives are giving the husbands, but I'm not saying anything. But so like what it says that he's so lazy that he can't even lift the food to his mouth. It's hyperbole, obviously, but. It's that way today, too. He's so lazy that he buys tools. He buys this tool and that tool, but he never really does any project at home. Or he's so lazy that or she will be so lazy, and then she gets all this stuff. She's going to do all this, crochet work and whatnot. And she buys everything that they have on the going out of business sale at Joann's. And she's got the place full. She's got it. But she never really gets around to figuring out how to do it or learning it or anything. And we could go on. It could be the same thing with guitars, but we won't even talk about that, right? No, I wouldn't. So anyway, or people a lot of times they will buy study books, Bibles and study books, and they think that somehow by osmosis, that stuff is going to come off the pages into their head and turn into biblical wisdom. And so the books never get used, never get opened, and it's just really sad. So he says, Solomon was the opposite of this. He was a busy guy, and he was a thinker, and he was a doer. He got so much done. It was amazing. And verse 16 kind of closes out the thought about the lazy guy. Lazy people consider themselves smarter even than 7 wise counselors. And I've seen this. We've all seen people like this too. They've all got an opinion. It has no merit or basis to them. They're too lazy to research it out, to study it out. I run into this all the time. I had a guy I told you came into my office between services, and he had this one little verse, and he was building a whole thing around it. And I said, well, what about all the other verses, Well, he hasn't really studied those. Somebody else approached me a little while back, and they said, well, I've got this, I want to get this, Hebrew-Greek combination book. I don't know what I was looking at. He says, and I said, well, I can recommend you this better one, or this one will work a little easier for you. Well, he said, well, I'm really too lazy for that. He actually said that word. I'm really too lazy for that, so I'm really just looking for quick answers. Well, it just doesn't work that way. And so, anyways, the fool is he's in this all too, and he's considered himself smarter. Remember we talked about the last week. The word for fool it's not using the word fool here, but he's talking about the fool, and he's going to go on now to talk about the fool again. The lazy person is a fool, and the fool is the Hebrew word tisel, which really means insolent. And I really got to thinking about etymology of words today a little bit, and it just kind of hit me. An insolent person is a person who is insulated from something else. So wire is insulated so that you don't get shocked when you touch it, and so it's got a coating on it, and that keeps you from it. Gloves insulate in such a way that you don't get cold, and that's what they're designed. Well, the fool is really insulated from knowledge. He's insulated from that, and therefore he's just out of control. It's like a bunch of open wires in your junction box. He's just kind of out of control. So anyway, then there are a couple other verses that don't necessarily apply to the lazy man before it goes on to the next topic. Verse 17, interfering in somebody else's argument is as foolish as yanking on a dog's ears. You want to be helpful with people, and you want to listen to them if they have a need. Be careful how far you go into your opinion, your advice, your counsel. Be very careful how far you go into their lives, because people really, they need to retain a private area of their lives, and you can cross that line and you can make a real problem out of things. Don't think that everybody needs your extremely wise counsel. Sometimes just a kind word is all that's needed. Be careful about that. You interfere in people's lives, and I found this out, in all these years of ministry, especially the early years, I've kind of really backed off from it. I don't like to do a lot of marriage counseling, but when I've done it, especially crisis counseling, I'm really careful. First of all, both people have to be there, but beyond that, it's like I take a light touch, and mentally I'm one step back farther than I am right there at the moment. Because I know if I get too close and they get all rosy and well and everything, then they turn their anger on the counselor. And I've had that happen too many times. And so we don't do it anymore. So if you come to me with marital problems, you're probably not going to get really everything you need. Go to somebody else. Go to a stranger. You won't hate him after the fact, after you've exposed all the nonsense that's going on in your home. Verse 18, just as damaging as a madman shooting a deadly weapon is someone who lies to a friend and then says, oh, I was just joking. That doesn't fly, and the older you get, and you get a little wiser about that. And we've done that. How many? We probably maybe have all done it from time. We said something and said, "Oh, I was just kidding." Well, we weren't when we said it, but we realized after we said it, it was stupid, and so we try to cover our tracks like that. It doesn't cover very well, by the way, and it's a dangerous thing. So therefore, don't do that. Don't lie to people. Don't lie to a friend or a family or anybody, because when you do it, you're not only creating damage, you're really destroying any trust that is there between a friendship, especially, when you get into the home with your kids or your mate, your husband or your wife. Don't lie. We shouldn't be lying in the first place, but if you lie, there's a repercussion that comes out of that. Now he shifts over to the issue of quarreling and gossip, and he's going to spend several verses on this. Verse 20, let me get it here. Fire goes out without wood, and quarrels disappear when gossip stops. So, so many fires, and we've had so many fires in California, it doesn't take much. It just takes a spark or something to set a fire. We've had inadvertent fires. We had one we saw just last week going out by Banning on the on-ramp, and it was just probably somebody flicked a cigarette or something there. That's all it took in the dry weather for that to spark. And so the fire trucks were out there, and it's just like that. And so we need to understand that when we gossip, and if we do this kind of thing, it's going to create a fire. I'm going to have you maybe stay here for a minute, and we're going to go over to James 3, starting at verse 2. And this verse will beat us up badly. Just brace yourself a little bit. Verse 2. We're going to read a little bit here. Indeed, we all make mistakes, for if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect and could also control ourselves in every other way. We can make a large horse go wherever we want to by means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches. But a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is the flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. People can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil, full of deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. Does a spring of water bubble out with both fresh water and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? No, you can't draw fresh water from a salty spring. You say, what's the last thing got to do with it? Remember, Jesus taught about the tree and the fruit. And if you have a good tree, it bears good fruit. And if you have a bad tree, it'll bear bad fruit. It can never be the other way around. So we need to understand the tongue is vicious. Now you say, well, it's not really physically the tongue. That's right. It's the heart. It's the mind. It's your thinking. He'll elaborate upon it we'll go back to Proverbs now. He'll elaborate upon this, but you need to understand it's, whatever you're thinking, that's bad enough. But if it actually gets this far, it's going to create some real problems. And it's bigger than you can imagine. It only takes a word. It only takes one crass little argument statement to bury a friendship sometimes. It's all it takes to create a problem where an argument gets so bad between a husband and wife, they don't really recover very well from it. It only takes one little word like that to separate good friends in a church. I've just seen it all. And we've got to get our act together on this stuff. So it goes on in verse 21, and it talks about this, the twin to it, or the twin part of it, that's quarreling. A quarrelsome person starts fights as easy as hot embers light charcoal and fire lights wood. To quarrel, from the Hebrew word mogan, means to strive or have contention or the friction, and like an ember, it will light a fire. People you don't think much about it, you say, well, that person, I just got to tell them my opinion on this. Well, now just think about that. What will happen if you do that? Well, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. What will happen if you do that? Well, man, somebody's got to put them in their place. I'd leave that one to God or their wife, but just when you do it, are you thinking about what will happen afterwards? How many of you have ever seen a really good church fight? I'm being a doozy. Have any of you ever seen one of those? I had a friend of mine back, I don't know if he was in Missouri or where he was. So he went out to pastor church. They had a church fight. People got so mad about it. At nighttime, some of them came by and shot up the church building with their guns. I mean, it was empty, I hope. But they shot it up. That's how angry the whole thing got. People get out of control. Look at it today. Look at what's going on. We just saw in the news the one boy that stabbed one in the heart, and he, all the witnesses there, he did it, and he was found guilty. They're going to retry the thing. He's going to still be guilty, but it's just horrible. When you get fussing with one another and you go out of control, it gets too late to pull it back. That boy's not going to come back from the grave. That's just so sad. So we got to remember that. So another part or participle of quarreling is the area of gossip. Look at verse 22 with me. Rumors are dainty morsels that sink deep into one's heart. Gossiping, now I have to say this, not from experience, obviously. Well, gossiping is fun for people. They like to get together and have a little tidbit information that nobody knew about. Come on, you know what I'm talking about, right? How many of you know what I'm talking about? You ungodly people, like you've done it, haven't you? You've gossiped, haven't you? Everybody's gossiped. I don't gossip. I really don't gossip, but I learned my lesson many years ago. I didn't think I was a gossip, but I found myself gossiping about somebody about something wasn't true. And you know what? He gently and kindly caught me on it. And he talked with me, ran into him in a restaurant one morning. He says, "Oh, I'd like to talk with you." I said, "Oh, why?" And he brought up something he had heard that I said. I said, "I'm so sorry I said that. You're absolutely right." I learned. I was very young at that time, very young minister, and I thought, now I know I know the damage. I'm glad that I got caught. I'm glad he Pulled my sheets on that one. But the problem is, as it says right here, when I gossip, it sinks into the heart and it stays there. When you gossip about somebody and somebody hears that gossip, let's just say, that Brittany, I'm talking to you about, Andrew over here. Did you know Andrew? I let her know something. It's not true. It's just gossip. I don't know anything. I'm just spitting out something like that. Now, even if after a while, sometime down the line, she finds out, well, that's not really true. I have tainted her view during that whole time. I may have tainted it permanently. You can do that. You could get something stuck into somebody they can't get rid of because they've taken it from you. They think you're a truthful person, and you've gossiped and you've put some barb in there that won't come out. That's just the way that it is. It smolders. It doesn't want to go out, the Bible says. So verse 23, these are all continuing with the same thinking. Smooth words may hide a wicked heart, just as a pretty glaze covers a clay pot. These deceptive words that go out as gossip, they look good, they sound good, they're fun to talk about for some people and whatnot. But on the inside, there's something really wicked. In fact, you'll see in a few verses down what it leads to. Verse 24, people may cover their hatred with pleasant words, but they're deceiving you. Let me go and read the next verse. They pretend to be kind, but don't believe them. Their hearts are full of many evils. Now, just understanding where he's at, they're revealing a hatred that's covered over nicely with some pleasant words. It's like putting a nice maple frosting, like donut kind of frosting, on top of liver and giving it to somebody. It just doesn't really work at all, does it? I remember being in Russia years ago, and I think this was, I didn't even know if you were there yet. I don't know. Maybe you guys were there, but I remember getting a birthday cake for somebody, and, it's a little different over there. And the birthday cake, they keep it moist by putting spinach. Was it spinach that they put in it for moisture? I've never had a cake with spinach in it, and it's the weirdest thing. It looked beautiful. They were the most beautiful looking things. Now they've improved the whole taste of things. It's a different country today than it used to be, but the taste, all of the cakes back in those days tasted about the same. It tasted kind of like cardboard, just like all the early ice cream. You want vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry. They all taste the same, but here they are, But you can cover things in a pretty way, but the fact of the matter is they're just covering over the same old lies, the deceptions of, the deceiver is taught well in that one. They may get away with these wicked things, the false words, for a while, but eventually it says in verse 26, while their hatred may be concealed by trickery, their wrongdoing will be exposed in public. They make a pretense, but ultimately they don't get away with it. It bounces back on them. Let me tell you how that practically often works out. So people will gossip and gossip and gossip. You say, well, how's that getting back at them? After a while, they realize people know that they're a gossip. You learn that pretty quick. When somebody's gossiping you, you'll think, well, okay, now this is not the first time I've heard them do this. So after a while, you realize nobody is talking to me anymore. They're afraid to. They're afraid that they're next. They don't want to give you any information about what's going on in their own life. So you find you lose your friends. You lose your people that you can talk to because, they realize that if they get into your bandwidth, it's over with, so to speak. Verse 27, if you set a trap for others, you will get caught in it yourself. If you roll a boulder down on others, it will crush you instead. So if you happen to be the deceiver or the gossip or whatever, it will eventually come back and it will crush you in one way or another. When you'll find out after a while that, hey, they're having a gathering, they're having a Bible study, they're having a gathering, people over here getting together, and you weren't invited. You used to be invited, but you're not invited because they found you to be a pariah. They don't want you because you got a wicked tongue and nobody's safe, and they don't want it. Verse 28 closes out that subject. A lying tongue hates its victims, and flattering words cause ruin. I think that's the bottom line. You need to realize this. Most people don't realize it. When they're gossiping, they're not really thinking along these lines. But when we gossip about somebody, we're hating them. We're doing the opposite of building them up. We're doing the opposite of building them up in the eyes of others, the character of others. We're gossiping, trying to pick at them. And it's a form of hatred, as it's been telling us in these last verses right here. And we need to be very careful. And we need to examine ourselves, all of us. I did. I was a young minister. I think the story I just told you back was well over 50 years ago. I was in probably my first couple of years of ministry. And like I said, God pulled my sheets on that one. I am so glad that he did because he took a thing out of my life that I never needed to be there in the first place. I certainly didn't need it all these other years. So So if you've heard that I've said something about you, that's just not true. That's gossip. Think about that one for a bit. Let your mind go round and round with that. I'm just kidding. I don't talk about you guys. I really don't care about you guys, so I don't really talk about you at all. Chapter 27, verse 1. So we move on to a new subject. So don't brag about tomorrow since you don't know what the day will bring. I can't tell you how many people over the years have tried to talk me into a 5-year plan. I don't have one. And there are some churches that look successful and they have a 5 or 10-year plan. How do you know what God's going to do in 5 or 10 years? How do you know how do you know he's not coming back tonight? How do you know those things? You don't know those. Jesus said in Matthew 6:34, so don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is evil enough for today, or is enough for today. Going back to James, where we were, only this time I'm going to go take you to the next chapter, chapter 4. And in chapter 4, he starts off in verse 13 talking about this. Look, here, you who say, today or tomorrow, we're going to go to a certain town and we'll stay there a year. We'll do business and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here for a little while and then it's gone. What you ought to say is if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you're boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. So who's God in your life? Who's on the throne of your life? Is it God, or are you still there? Are you calling the shots, or is God calling the shots? Ultimately, he's going to call the shots anyway. You're just going to look stupid if you're not wise about these things. A second thing is about ego in verse 2. Let someone else praise you, not your own mouth. A stranger, not your own lips. I'm always amazed, why God ever gave us this thing called ego in the first place. I mean, some people don't have a lot of ego. Some people are very introverted. They don't stretch out at all. They're afraid to. But most people in life have certain challenges. It takes a lot of ego to get out to introduce yourself to a girl that you really like, that you think of, hey, I wouldn't mind marrying that person. That takes a lot of, what's the word? What's the Greek word? The modern Greek phrase? I don't know what it is. It takes a lot of oomph, but it takes more than that. Anyway, it takes something to get it. It takes for every person who gets up and teaches in a school. It takes them, especially in the early years, to get up in front of people. It's hard. People who sing in the early days. I love, even with the cold, Valerie was singing so well tonight. I loved hearing her. But I remember when she first started, it was very weak because she was very shy, very timid. It goes with the peer pressure of that age, I think. And so, you know what I'm talking about? So ego is a weird thing, and yet God has given us that root part of ego so that we will get up and do things that he tells us to do, to go preach your first sermon if you're going to be a preacher, or to go out and get on the worship team, sing your first song, or go out and witness to your first person that they might come to Christ. This takes something that we don't have normally. But the problem we have is that we go overboard with ego. Ego has become a real centrist thing in our society, and we need to put it in its place. For ego's reason, we do a lot of things that we shouldn't do, and we're saturated with performers all over the place who are just full of ego, and they spread it like that in all the wrong ways. Paul tells the Philippians in chapter 2, verse 3, so don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. You need to let ego take its check. Well, I won't go down. I won't go there. Okay, verse 3. A stone is heavy and a sand is weighty, but the resentment caused by a fool is even heavier. The fools, we talked about him last week, is that person who, the Kasil word, is insolent, who is rebellious in his approach. He can't be taught. And he's saying right here that this person he's causing resentment. A stone's heavy and sand is weighty, I understand. But the resentment caused by a fool is even heavier. I don't think a lot of things hit us as mad as when somebody really resents us, especially if it's a family member. They resent you for something you've done, or a good friend. You've taken advantage, and they realize it, and they resent you. I've seen this in families a lot. I saw it with my brother-in-law and my mother-in-law. I saw in the later years, he took advantage of her. And we could kind of see it. I couldn't put my finger on it. I could guess at it, but I didn't. But she saw it after a while too. And I think it really broke her heart. And it created resentment. And she didn't like him at all. And she wrote him out of her will. And the resentment was really pretty thick. And she wouldn't talk about it. I appreciate that. But I just think we need to be really careful that we don't do things that will cause resentment by somebody who is precious to us. I think it's a really important thing. Verse 4 talks about anger. Anger is cruel and wrath is like a flood, but jealousy is even worse or more dangerous. Anger is bad. We're counseled over again about anger, especially Galatians chapter 9, where it talks about the works of the flesh. But jealousy tops that because it seethes. You see, anger can come and anger can diffuse. You ever had a verbal fight with your brother or your sister or your wife or your husband? You ever had that? But within a day or two, it's like, we're back to eating Jell-O together. We're just, things come and go. Well, Jell-O or whatever you want to have. You're back having a good time together. You heal. The love helps you to heal. But when you look at jealousy lasts. It doesn't go away in a day or two. Jealousy is something that builds and embers are in it, and it smolders for a long time, maybe for life. And so you got to understand that. That's to hold a grudge. Jealousy is compacted into that as well. Verses 5 and 6 talk about a great little section on being corrected and correcting others. An open rebuke is better than hidden love. Words from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Let's talk about that a little bit. When Peter went to Galatia, I think it was where he went, and he came from Antioch to the church that was in Galatia. It had been started because of the ministries of Paul. When he came to them, and some of the Jewish brethren came with him, he went to eating in a kosher way. In other words, he knew the freedom that God had given, but all of a sudden he was trying to impress them, and it would make the Gentile believers, new believers, feel badly because, well, now what do? We were going to have, ham sandwiches, and it's not flying all of a sudden. And when Paul heard about it, he said in Galatians 2:11, but when Peter came to Antioch, back to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. It was referring to that. I had my two locations mixed up, I'm sorry. And because it was so wrong, because if we live in legalism, that means we are the one making us better. We are the one that are subscribing to a set of rules that we are going to keep. But when we instead rely upon the grace of God, he works us from the inside out. He cures us and cures us of our sin issues from the inside out. It's everything in the world. It's probably one of the biggest doctrines that I can think of. So let's talk about it a little bit. When are we to go like Paul to Peter? And when are we supposed to rebuke somebody or correct them? Sometimes we think of rebuke, it's kind of a harsh word, but when are we supposed to do this? Well, I thought about this. I think it can be helpful to do it when somebody is compromising or about to, like Peter. Paul called him out, and he called him out for this legalism. If you see somebody that's about ready to fall into sin or to make an error like that, you can rebuke them if you feel that's what the Lord wants you to do, but it doesn't mean you have to yell or point your finger. Let's be a little more gentle about things than that. I don't like it when people come on strong to me. Do you? You say, no, and I'm not liking this message either. I don't like that, and I want to, so I want to take it much more, as the Bible uses that term in the Greek, nethetically. I want to be able to approach people much more gently, much more, I heard this about you, but I'm sure it's probably not true. That would be a nethetic way of going at somebody. In other words, taking that light touch and giving them an opportunity to either confess it or digest what you're trying to do. So I think if it's helpful to keep somebody from sinning or compromising, I think that's a good time to maybe step in. Also, I think it's helpful to correct somebody when love is motivating me to. There's a problem going on. Paul again talks to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 4:14. For I'm not writing these things, because he had just blasted them and just got done blasting the people he's talking to. I'm not writing these things to shame you, but to warn you as my beloved children. So if love is truly motivating me, then I have a right to go and try to correct somebody gently, to rebuke them gently, to, if they're about ready to do something really stupid, to be very firm if I have to, but do it gently. I need to go and do that. And I think it's really helpful to those who want to grow. And I give the example, we have this couple named Aquila and Priscilla. Interesting enough, they usually put her name first in the Bible, but this couple, and they see young Barnabas, and he is preaching, and he's really powerful. God really used him. He joined with Paul at times. He finished up. He became the leader pastor of a couple of churches that Paul started, and just a godly young guy. But he didn't have all of his, Christian marbles in a row, and he was off on a few things. And so they came to him, and they corrected him by teaching him what's called a more excellent way. Isn't that a better way to put it anyway? Hey, they're really doing great, but they're really screwing up on this. Well, no, I wouldn't say this. Don't tell them you're screwing up on this. Just say, you know what? There's even a better way to do this. Let me sit down and explain to you what Jesus taught us about this, and do it in a more excellent way. Now, rebuking somebody is one thing. It's another thing when it's aimed at you. When you get rebuked, somebody comes to you and say, now, not every rebuke is true. You'll know when people are talking to you. Usually if it's not true, you don't really have that much trouble with it. If it is true, it kind of gets into your skin. But somebody comes to you in some way or some fashion, even kindly to rebuke you, you will take one of four roads. The first thing that you'll do, you can't, with some people, they'll accept that rebuke with resignation. Oh, I've been caught. Oh, man. And they might even talk themselves out of whatever ministry they're in. They might pout about it. Pouting goes kind of along with that. So with resignation. Another way we can accept it with self-pity. Some people think, well, I'm still better than Phil. I mean, we're all better than Phil. You kind of justify things, and you think, well, they don't know what's in my life. They don't know what's going on in my life. You're wrong, and you know it. But still, they don't understand everything that I have to go through. They don't understand, but you're saying, you go, okay, well, I accept it. And you got this self-pity thing going. Again, pouting goes with that one. The third way is that we can just be angry and resent the person who's telling it to us, or resent God, because we realize maybe God's probably sent them with this. But you get mad. Somehow God gets the blame anyway. Ultimately, God will get the blame. And so you can accept it with anger. You're not really truly accepting it, but that's how you're taking it instead. Or finally, you can accept it with by being grateful and realizing that, they were right. And most likely, God has nudged this person who's had to grindingly come and try to confront them over this issue. Now, I've seen it all play out all over the time. But I just tell you, we're a weird little batch, and you need to learn to accept it when God rebukes you, even using another person. I can take a rebuke from God when it comes straight from God. Have you had those? I mean, many times I've been in prayer and I've had the Lord just rebuke me. I'm thinking I'm praying for one thing, and the Lord he says, who do you think you are? Well, what are you talking about? What are you whining about? And I won't get into any of my conversations with the Lord on that, but God can slap me around, and I'll take it right then and there because I know it's God speaking. But when God sends one of you to me, and I know, you have fallacies like I do, and you're telling to me, I just need to understand that, perhaps God is speaking to you to talk to me. And you're probably just like me. It's very hard for me to go and rebuke anybody in any fashion. I don't like to correct people, especially adults. I don't like it. I don't like people. For most of my ministry, if I had to do that, I was correcting somebody who was older than me. I'm finally on that end of the scale. But for years, I was the younger guy, and it was very hard to do. And I can remember rebuking and correcting people that were, 20, 30 years older than me, and I felt really weird about it. But I knew it had to be done, and so I did it as kindly as I could possibly do it, and they still hated me for it. Okay, yeah, it just goes with it. So, verse 7 says, a person who is full refuses honey, but even bitter food tastes good to the hungry. A person who strays from home is like a bird that strays from its nest. So let's cover these guys real quick. I used to, in the early years of my marriage, I used to complain when we'd want to go out. We've always had a date night. We've always had a date night. as far back as I can remember. I mean, whenever, there were times when the kids were little, it was kind of hard to do it. But whenever we could, we would have a date night. It would be Friday night or whatever. And we would I'd get a sitter or whatever. We'd make some arrangement. And we would go out because I just always wanted to date. I liked dating her, that many years ago, 58, 59 years ago. And I decided if we got married, I still wanted to continue to do that. And so it's been just part of the romance of our lives. And anyway, so every now and then, though, we'd go out, and Donna's always been frugal, and I've always been ready to just spend anything we've got, And I'm thinking, oh, great, let's go out to Black Angus, which to us was high dollar, back in those days. And she's thinking, I don't think so. We can get a pizza deal for, back in those days for $6.99, and so. And I'd, inside I'd whine, I'd pout. I'd think, I just wanted a piece of meat. I haven't had meat in years. I want a piece of meat. And so we pout about this. But now just put it in perspective. Most of this world will never have a piece of meat. Most of this world will never know what a lobster tastes like. In fact, a lot of the world wouldn't even know what pizza tastes like. We have it so much better. So no matter what you have, what you're griping about eating, there are people in the world that would just love to have what's on your plate. It's just that simple. We need to keep that focus in our heads. And I was thinking about this also. God has a great cure for this. Not every hungry person in the world can be affected by you. Obviously, it's a big world, a lot of people. But we're taught in Acts chapter 2, this really wonderful picture of what happens when people get saved. God saved in Acts chapter 2 and formed the initial church at Pentecost. So all of a sudden, we've got a lot of believers. We don't have any formal church. There's no Bible study like this going on. But who knows? They might have taught longer than we have written in the Word. We don't know what all they did with those people. But all those people were saved. All of these, many thousands of people were saved. And they were so excited because the Spirit had come inside of them. They were just chatting and talking, and they lost track of time, perhaps. I don't know, but probably most of them did not plan on standing right there and having lunch with it. Some did and some didn't. And so when it came, they didn't want to separate. The fellowship was so different and sweet and wonderful that they had, and people were getting hungry. The people who had brought food started sharing it with these people who had been strangers just an hour earlier. And they were sharing food so that nobody had to leave. And maybe somebody would run and get a bunch of stuff and bread and stuff, bring it back, and they were just chatting away and having a great time of fellowship. This is God's creation for the church. It is, and in that creation, that simple getting rid of our grabbiness and the Spirit of God bringing in all of those giftings, and then the fruits of the Spirit begin to flow out. People say, well, where? We've got some more food. Here, we brought potato salad. Here. Well, maybe they didn't have potato salad, but we brought food. Here, don't go home, don't go away, stay right here with us. We're having a great time. And then in the course of all that, apparently people, just in talking in the conversations, people realize, hey, that family, they live 3 days from here. They may not have enough money or food to get all their tribe back home. And so they begin sharing things, exchanging, helping people with things, not just food. It was a wonderful picture. That's what the church is supposed to be like. That's what the church is like. So that if there's a need in this body and we hear about it, we're going to try to meet that need. Simple. You don't have any food, we're going to try to make sure you get some food. If you're losing your electricity, we're going to try to help you get your electricity paid before they shut it off. We're going to do what we can. Sometimes it's in a formal way from our benevolent fund. Sometimes it's much more, let's use the yuppie term, organic. You're just talking with them, you realize, and you're thinking, well, I got that much money on me. Let me help out. That's the way it's supposed to work. God put that money in your pocket in the first place. Maybe that's why he put it there at all. You're thinking, well, I like that new Xbox. The Lord's saying, moron, this family's starving to death over here. Give them some money. We can't separate ourselves from the need of the poor. And the person who is separated away from home, as he's talking about in that second verse that we read, going back to verse 8, let's take one more peek at that. A person who strays from home is like a bird that strays from the nest. And, your church family is so important, much more important than a lot of us think. When you stray away from, you've been backslide or just don't show up very much or whatever, or you get away from the Bible study that you guys, maybe you're invested in with some guys going on, and you just kind of fed her back a little ways, you know what? You're losing something. You're losing a bond that God put together for a reason. Either you're going to need something or they're going to need something. And you're supposed to be there for that. Either they're going to need a word from the Lord or you're going to need a word from the Lord. And you guys are together for that. When we separate, when we stray, we're not near our home here. And we need to keep that in perspective also. Right, guys? Verses 9 and 10, I love the way he talks about the way we counsel. The heartfelt counsel of a friend is as sweet as perfume and incense. Never abandon a friend, either yours or your father's. When disaster strikes, you won't have to ask your brother for assistance. It's better to go to a neighbor, which is close by, than to a brother who lives so far away. Let's start off with the first part of the heartfelt. It's a compound Hebrew word. It says exactly what it is, but the word for heart there is heart or breath. The second part of that compound is advice or decision. In other words, the counsel that you give to somebody must be thought out. Don't just, armchair quarterback. When you're talking to somebody and they've got a problem, don't go in there with preconceived thoughts. Sit there for a while and listen. See what the real problem is. And you'll find oftentimes it's much deeper or much different than what you thought initially. And the Lord will give you wisdom on the spot. In the early days of being a minister, I used to, try to get prepared when somebody's coming for counseling. I'm thinking, well, it's either about this, or this. So I'm getting all these scriptures ready, put them on a Post-it note in my Bible, like I just happen to know where they're at. I'm doing all this, and they come in, I'm ready, Well, then you realize after a little while, you got all the wrong scriptures for all the wrong things. That's not the problem at all. And your pre-made package of little things you're going to say, they don't really work. So be thoughtful, listening to them. Have a heart for what you're hearing, and then have a heart for what you're going to say back to them. And, so many times, so often, what I get ready to say does not come out of my mouth that way. It comes out different words come out. And, I'm ready to pray for them, and I'm, going to have one of those sermon prayers, over them. The Lord just changes it all up. He thinks, well, you don't need a sermon right now. And here's what and the prayer just takes off almost prophetically, it seems like sometimes, because it wasn't where I was going at all. Be listening to the Lord. Let it be heartfelt. Don't try to package it. It's priceless and it's precious. And what is given by a friend, as it goes on and talks about, is really important. Don't abandon your good friends. Your brothers may move away. Your sister may move away. Your parents, you may be distanced from your family. But your Christian brothers and sisters, if you're really solid, they'll follow you, especially in this day of our cell phones all over the world. We can talk with Jason and Brittany really anytime we want to, or over the internet or social media, whatever. We're able to do that today, making it even easier. So wherever our brothers go, we don't have to be out of contact with them. My other brother has died, so I'm totally out of contact with him. So it's good to have people that aren't related that way. I love it. So many of our people from the years of this church, some of them live in the area, the county, some of them live across the United States, other places, and so many are going to come for our 40th. And it's going to be great. It's going to be a little slice of heaven because we're going to see each other again, so many of us. I like that. But those friendships have not died because they're in Christ. They're linked, unlike the world. They're in Christ, and they have something that strings us together eternally. Verse 11, be wise, my child, and make my heart glad. Then I will be able to answer my critics. I like that. He says, my child, make my heart glad. Some of these are the things that David talked to his son Solomon about. But the wise child not only honors his mother and his father, but he also honors their thinking. As they've imparted and tried to impart wisdom into him, he begins to act it out. And when they see that child, whether it's Ellie's age or they're older, when I see people like Brian, who's much older than that, my child espousing the wisdom that I have tried to put into their lives, espousing it or teaching it to their children or acting it out in their lives, it makes me glad because I realize these are things that keep them out of trouble, all of them. So it's important. Verse 12. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Now think about this for just a minute. He's asking you to think about things. What is it to be prudent? It's a person who is thoughtfully acting, thoughtfully and pondering and acting, making it more than just one step. Sometimes it takes a few steps to get to the right thing. He thinks about his household. He can't see everything coming down the road, but he realizes certain dangers. He realizes if I'm moving from a Midwest small town and I'm moving into an LA suburb, I've got to tell my kids, I've got to teach them and train them a little different because they're not equipped for what they're going to get hit with here. It's training them as they get to a different age, training them because they're going to go into a different age, and that's a different set of peer friends that are potentially out there, and getting them ready for it. Or if I see that the market's going to go a particular way, I'd be really careful about how I spend my money and how my reserves hold up. Do you understand what I'm saying? Be wise. Say, we get these stupid loans coming around all the time. Well, you start off with a low interest rate and they go up. They outlawed those things, but they're back right now. But not thinking ahead of what will it be like? I can afford the payment now, but it's going to be higher in 2 years. Can I afford it in 2 years? And the salesman will tell them that they can, but the economy goes up and down. So being wise, so you're not in that trap. These are the wise steps that we take, and we try to avoid the things that we potentially see coming along. But the fool doesn't think about it. He doesn't care. He's saying, well, it'll all work out. And he goes and he keeps making mistake after mistake after mistake. And you watch their life and you think, man, how can you afford all this? You're wiping out your health, you're wiping out your family, you're wiping out your finances, and you have nothing. I can't tell you how many people I talk with, who are closing in on my age who don't have $5 set aside for this part of their life. That's not wise. The wise person thinks ahead. You may not have everything you need, but you ought to have enough to keep you up off the streets, right? Think it through. Now, it's the same thing in every other part of your life. In my Christian life, well, I'm doing okay. You're not thinking through things. Are you ready for some big disaster to hit you or your family? I'm talking about spiritually. Are you ready for that? Well, we say, well, I hope that never happens. Well, it does. Bad things happen. So what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do? Do you just blithely go forward, or do you make every precaution that you can? Do you make every precaution by building yourself up in the faith, as we're taught in the Word of God, knowing that things can and probably will come along, and we're taught to do that, right? You with me so far? Let's go ahead and begin. Take this down home now. So, verse 13, it comes along again. I love this. He says, get security. This is like the third time we've read it. Get security from someone who guarantees a stranger's debt. In other words, that's tongue-in-cheek. He would tell you, obviously, don't ever do that. But he's saying, go ahead and get it. Get a deposit. If he does it for foreigners, get it from him. People have, over the years, asked me as pastor for reference. I don't sign for anybody for anything. If you want a loan, sorry. My kids even ask me for loans. I'm really slow on co-signing because they want boats and cars and Mustangs that I can't have. So, no, I'm not going to sign for one of those. If your kid has a liver goes out, we'll step it up and sign up for some financing. We'll put our name on the line. But people ask me for reference letters for jobs or for apartments or different things. And I have to tell you this. I told people this a few years back, and a funny thing happened from it. I said, you know what? I got to tell you, I won't lie on any referral form. If you are going into an apartment, you're responsible. I'm not going to tell them you're responsible. I'm not going to be mean or not go out of my way to make sure you don't get the apartment, but you probably won't after what I say. Or that you don't get the job. But if you're the lazy guy we talked about in the beginning, and you're asking me to give you a good reference for this job, I'm not going to tell him you're a great worker because I know, I got save what reputation I have left myself, credibility I have myself. I'm not going to lie for you. When I said that a few years ago, I almost have never gotten anybody asking me for one since. So it's like, we don't want one from him. Well, we'll go to Phil. Maybe he'll tell us something good, say something nice about me or something. We got to be honest about this. Someone says, look, he's mocking right here. If you don't really know somebody really well, don't vouch for them. You don't have to. It's not being mean. Just don't vouch for them. Let them go find somebody else and just don't do that. Job references or any of that stuff. We're closing off here. Verse 15 and 16 tell to us, Well, actually, verse 14, a loud and cheering greeting early in the morning will be taken as a curse. In other words, just settle down. A quarrelsome wife, don't you hate that? Somebody gets right in your face and it's like they've had just way too much caffeine. And there's, how are you doing, brother? And they're shaking you, and hugging you like that. And it's like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't touch me. A quarrelsome wife is annoying as a constant dripping on a rainy day. Stopping her complaints is like trying to stop the wind or trying to hold something with greased hands. I didn't say it. He said it. But I want to talk about it, even at that. So he's brought this up more than once already in the Proverbs. Solomon brought most of it on himself. But people get cranky. Women and men both get cranky and can become quarrelsome or argumentative. I think the first thing you need to do is stop and say, why? Why is, at least using the woman, so let me just go that direction. You can go the other way, just easy. Why is my wife complaining all the time? Why is she angry all the time? Why does she always want to pick a fight with me all the time? Why? Now, Donna doesn't. She doesn't do this at all. But why would she be doing this? The first thing every Christian needs to do, guy or gal, look at this, take a good hard look at you. Are you loving her and showing her the life that God has for her? Are you upholding her? Are you saying, hey, I forgot over the years, what are the things that you want to accomplish, honey? What were the things that you wanted to do in life? And, I remember, I think I've told you before, we went through Bible college. We both graduated. Donna wanted to get her bachelor's degree after that because she wanted to direct preschool. And by that time, Brian was a little baby, and we had one other boy. Doug was already born, and we'd been through college. So we've been married, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years, something like this by this point. And it hit me. I think I was reading something like this, and it hit me, and I talked with her, and I said, honey, what is it that you really want to do? She said, well, I always wanted to finish that. And I said, well, let's see what that would take. She thought it was dead. It was just a dead issue. She was a mom now, and that's all there was going to be in life. There was no other option. And she really felt there was somehow a ministry in the future with the other. I said, well, let's check into it. We found out what it would take. And she'd have to take a couple of nights a week. She'd have to take classes over at the college. So we were down in Mission Viejo at Saddleback. And I said, okay, well, it's community college for the classes you're going to need for this. And there's directors, things you take. It was just a formula for everything we needed to do. And the kids would need to be watched for a couple of nights a week. And I said, let's do it. She couldn't believe it. She just couldn't believe it. And God used that, and for many years provided income for her, which blessed our household also during rough times. Even as we started this church, it lasted all the way into that. So it was a good move to be able to do that. But she needed to be shown that she's important. She needs to be shown that she's respected and she's loved and she's appreciated. You can't get all caveman about it and say, well, I bring home the bread. But you don't cook it when you bring it home. So you need to understand, are you giving her what she needs? Are you providing a secure household for her? Because if you don't, she's going to be on edge because she's worrying about the whole family and she's worrying about her kids. And so we need to make sure that we have not done that. Solomon played the fool in that he had all of these wives. I don't care what reasons you want to attach to them, whether they're trying to make, trying to get different nations together, so I'll marry one of your daughters, and so we'll be linked together, and all these, these stupid things that are not biblical, not God's way of doing it. But whatever. So he had that going on. So he didn't even understand. I believe Solomon didn't even understand wife for what it means. I think David barely understood. He had 8 wives, and Bathsheba seems to be the one that he pretty much was with for the rest of his life, as in close conversations and everything. But listen, Jesus taught it clear. Genesis taught it clear. One guy, one girl. Then you can build a relationship. You can't build it with a bunch of other people in the room or in the house even. And so this is a problem. In other words, are the blockades out of the way, and are you guys doing what you need to do to make sure she's fulfilled, and vice versa? If that's the case, you're going to find a lot less arguing. If the guy is happy because she has seen to it that she's made the home and the kids right as to the degree that she can, and he comes home to that to where they can have a family when he comes home instead of kids just screaming and yelling and everything out of control. You know what? She provides a place of peace for him, and it's the same thing. And so if he's grumpy, he's got a lot less to be grumpy about. He realizes after a while, it's a whole lot better here than the craziness of the work I just came from all day. And you have built something with each other. Quarreling usually has a reason. Now, having said that, there are some people that are just quarreling people. Even after that, they're gonna fight you anyway. I know Bill Clinton said that about. He was talking not that long ago. He recounted what he had said before. He's talking about the East Bank situation that was going on during a lot of his presidency in Israel, and he was very clear about it. He says I talked with so many people over there, so many leaders over there, so many people on the ground, so many people from the different groups. Before Gaza was separated off as it is now. And he says, yeah, they don't want to share the land. They don't want a division of land. They want the Jews out of there. He said this several years ago, and he said it, he reiterated it not too long ago. That's just the fact. So they cannot be appeased. And some people in homes, some husbands and some wives cannot be appeased. They're never happy people. And those rare situations, this is kind of what he's referring to right here. If everything has been done and there's still cranky people, well, there's not much you can do about it. It's just saying, those people are a mess. They're a train wreck. I don't think that's often the case, by the way. Often I think there's a reason. If you break trust with your husband or your wife, if you break trust sexually or something like that, you've given a reason. There's just going to be this resentment there. And, you really need to seek the Lord for healing. And there needs to be a lot of true, introspective apologizing and such. But that's a subject that we don't even have time for tonight. But I think that's important. We'll close it with this. Verse 17 is a good verse from memory. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. There's when I try to point out these little ones that are so important. You need a good friend. Your good friends are good for each other. Now there are things that, you're now, can I just say one thing about that? Because we're time, it's past time. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize we're a few minutes past. Even your best friend, and your best friend should be your mate. But if you have a really good friend that's not your mate, they're not as good as your mate. Your confidence stays between the two of you. Ben is a really good friend of mine, but there's just things that Don and I have our world, and same thing with Ben and Joyce. They have their world that other people are not invited into. They're very gracious and open, but there's a world where it's them, and there's a world where it's Donna and I, and I will not break her trust. If she tells me something and it's between the two of us, it dies when I walk out the door. It's the way it's got to be. You have to have trust. Don't break your trust in any way whatsoever, okay? Don't break your trust in just talk with somebody the other day, building with another pastor. It's not in our town, but another pastor who has, again, messed up and broken the trust of sexually with his household. And you know what? It's probably going to wipe out his ministry and more. Just don't need that. Don't give cause or reason for it, okay?